I don't know how dumb you think we are.
Organizations.
Well,
you're ridiculous.
And the IDF is
the debate, the conversation we've all been waiting for. Dave Smith going to debate here on Piers Morgan Jonathan Conricus, who is the propaganda master goon for the Israeli government. He goes on Piers Morgan every once in a while, maybe like once a month, it seems like, to have these disaster conversations. They usually go horribly wrong, and today we have the the privilege of seeing how Dave Smith is able to handle him. So let's go ahead and watch. I'll probably have some comments along the way. Please drop a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, let me know what you think about this discussion. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it.
But you've never had what you've never had is you've never had a serving prime minister, right, using the fact that he's on trial for criminal charges, using the fact that he's the prime minister to get himself off the hook. And Dave Smith, to bring you back in there, I mean, he was...
No, never a serving one and a very powerful one at that. I agree.
Well, look, I'm glad that you've conceded on that ground. Dave, he was the Minister of Communications when this happened, so he was a member of the government. Like I said, we discussed the abuse of power and the irony of another abuse of power to do it. How relevant or otherwise is the pressure that Donald Trump brought to bear on this, urging Isaac Herzog, the president, to fully pardon Netanyahu before this? Because you can't imagine that Netanyahu would have done this if Donald Trump hadn't preemptively said what he said.
Maybe he would have, but certainly it's a pretty big deal when the president of the United States of America, the commander-in-chief of the world empire, and of course, the country that props up Israel, inserts himself in their domestic politics like that. I mean, that is no small deal. So it's certainly noteworthy. I think it's also noteworthy that in that same trip that you're talking about, Piers, is when Donald Trump joked around about how Miriam Adelson, his biggest donor, prefers Israel to the United States of America, only to then a week or so later, after he made the demand that Israel simply not annex the West Bank, the Knesset voted to annex the West Bank while J.D. Vance was in Israel. So I don't know. I mean, I actually love, Piers, that at this point when we do these panels, the first question that you ask the pro-Israel guest is just, you can't defend this, right?
Well, to be fair to Jonathan, though, but I would say the reason I like having Jonathan, but the reason I like Jonathan coming on uncensored, I do think he's been far more intellectually honest about some of these issues than many other people on the Israeli side. He's not afraid to say when he thinks things are wrong. You may not agree with a lot of the things he defends.
Well,
and that's just because some of the people are just so batshit fucking lunatic crazy, like off the spectrum, that you bring someone like Jonathan on that's still completely bonkers. And even he, when he sees a little bit of ground, it's like, wow, a reasonable, person is defending Israel. And it's like, no, he's still pretty insane. But it's just the rest of them are just unbelievably insane.
He's not afraid to be critical. Many of the others are blind, on both sides, by the way, can be blindly non-critical of whatever their side does.
Well, let me, in that spirit, Piers, I will say, and I appreciate Jonathan acknowledging what he did up front there. But I would say just maybe something we all could agree on. The idea that Netanyahu has put, it's obviously very self-serving, but the idea that Netanyahu is saying, well, you have to pardon me because that's what's best for national unity. That's how we move on from these divisive times. I could say, as an American, I remember Barack Obama, as I'm sure you remember, Piers, making this exact pitch about not prosecuting Bush administration officials for war crimes. There was a lot of pressure on Barack Obama from his left-wing activist base when he first got elected and took office in 2009 to prosecute some of the war crimes that had clearly happened, clearly been committed by the Bush administration, torture and lying us into war, all types of stuff. He said, no, we're not going to do that because we have to move on because that's what's best for national unity. And how has that worked out for us, Piers? We entered into the most divisive times certainly in my lifetime, I think undeniably in modern American history. And I would just say that if you ever want to see national unity, or if you ever want to see times of political divisiveness come to an end, the only answer is to hold criminals in government accountable. That's what actually would get people to believe in the system.
I would ban the pardon system in America, apart from where there is a clear and egregious and provable miscarriage of justice. I would just ban it. I think the moment that you can basically pardon, if you're in office, anyone on your side who's done anything, that is, in a way, it's an endorsement of crime, right? I just don't understand why people think that is a good system, and it gets abused by the left, it gets abused by the right, it gets abused by everybody, understandably. I want to just switch, Jonathan, to
absolutely
this appalling video that emerged from the West Bank of Israeli security forces shooting dead 2 Palestinians who, it appeared from the video that's come out, and they pull up their shirts to show that they are not carrying weapons. They put their arms in the air to surrender. This was during an ongoing Israeli military operation in the city of Jenin. And you can quite clearly see them surrendering. Then you see the Israeli security forces pushing them or urging them to go back inside. And the moment they're inside, they get shot dead, executed. Now, just on the face of it, this seems like a prima facie war crime. If you have people surrendering like that and you then shoot them dead, that is an illegal execution, isn't it?
Yeah, so if the video is unedited, which I believe that it is, and I don't have any evidence to suggest that it has been edited, and I take it at face value. And if indeed what we see in the video happened, then it is a dramatic deviation from anything that is acceptable in the IDF, in combat activity, or otherwise.
They've only been doing things like this for the last, 24 months straight. So yeah, radical deviation from what we've been doing all along.
And what currently is going on in Israel is that this is being investigated by the highest levels. The Israeli chief of staff, the commander-in-chief of the Israeli military, General Zamir, just put out a statement after having visited the place himself. This is just a few minutes ago. It's out on Israeli media, and I'm sure you'll see it soon on international media, where he says that by initial assessment, this is it raises significant questions, and that this needs to be investigated deeply. And if there indeed was, if this appears to be true, then there need to be consequences, and there will be consequences. Now, what's going on is that there's an investigation. The troops who are involved here are actually part of the police. They're a police special counterterrorism unit that operates under the military in military operations in Judea and Samaria, fighting Palestinian terrorists. The raid, or the activity specifically here, was many hours of hunting down terrorists that were planning attacks, and one of them had executed attacks against Israeli civilians. And they finally surrendered after they understood that they couldn't fight anymore, and then this allegedly happened. I don't like it at all. If it is indeed what happened, then I think there should be drastic measures against those involved. This type of behavior cannot be condoned. And I'll remind everybody that we've had similar but different instances in the past. In 2015 or 16, I believe it was, an Israeli soldier wrongfully shot, illegally shot a Palestinian terrorist who had tried to attack Israeli troops. That was also caught on camera. And that soldier was investigated, stripped of his ranks, and thrown into military jail.
Have any of them, Jonathan?
It was a heated political debate.
Look, again, I admire your candor about this, and I'm glad you say what you've said. But 2 observations I would make. One is that the IDF actual spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani, said shots had been directed toward the 2 men as they exited a building. Now, we can all see that is not what happened. So that's a lie. So you've got an IDF spokesperson on the record lying
how is
about
that, how is that a lie, Piers?
Because they were not shot as they exited a building. They've been shoved back under the building by the Israeli.
It's a pretty big omission.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
they came out and surrendered, and then were pushed back in, and then executed. Yeah. They weren't shot as they exited the building. Yeah. And the second thing I would say is you've got our old friend Ben Gvir, the National Security Minister, who gave his full backing to the officers involved, saying terrorists must die. And Dave Smith, I'll bring you in here. Right here, you've got 2 of the biggest problems in this whole war. One is that we only know about this because it was caught on camera. And it begs the question, how many more incidents like this have been going on that we don't know about? Once again, I remind people, and Jonathan, I know you agree with me about this, it is outrageous that the international media remain banned from the ground in Gaza, where they could verify what's been going on there, even though we're 7 weeks into a ceasefire, albeit one which has continued to have a lot of violence within it, but it is a ceasefire, and you still won't let the journalists in. I think it's outrageous that the Israeli government continues that ban. So you can't verify what's going on. But again, this only came to our light because of a video that was taken. And then you have people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich who don't give a damn. They would happily see all the Palestinians out of there. That's what their stated mission is.
Yes.
And the question then becomes, how much of their stated mission, which everyone on the Israeli side always tries to downplay, they're not that important, they're not this, not that. Well, they're senior members of the government. And I think, Netanyahu only got back into power by jumping into bed with these people. And I think he's been pushed ever more to the right in terms of his outlook on this. So you've got all this going on as the backdrop to this. What do you think about this video and what it represents?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I think you hit a lot of it exactly right, Piers, which is that, right, look, it's not just that the incident happened, which is horrible enough, but then the way that IDF spokesmen and the highest ministers in the government just lie through their freaking teeth about it. Like, they've been caught so many times, Piers, and you're absolutely right. There's a whole lot we don't know about, and I think when you won't let the media in, it reasonably leads to a presumption of guilt. The presumption is that you're trying to hide a lot of things, but just look at what we do know, Piers. We know that there's been multiple doctors in Gaza who have reported that toddlers have been used as target practice. We know that the IDF has admitted, multiple IDF soldiers and the Israeli government has admitted that they were firing live rounds into sites where people were desperately trying to get a little bit of food. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed in this way. We know about the Where's Daddy program. We know about all types of indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians. And
the Where's Daddy program, if I remember correctly, was when they would track, ostensibly who they identified as a Hamas individual, although that, how they identified those people is an open question. But they wouldn't shoot them until they actually would wait for the father the father would go home, and then they would send a Hellfire missile into the whole house and kill the whole family as well. So that was that program.
Every single time they lie through their teeth about it. And so I'm sorry, Jonathan can phrase this as that's not the IDF. People should be held responsible. There's an international, well, it seems to really often be exactly what the IDF does, and nobody ever seems to be held responsible.
I mean, it's very hard, Jonathan. It is very hard to maintain a position that the IDF and these security forces were operating, as you say, under their command, that the IDF is the most moral army in the world when you see them literally breaching the Geneva Convention on tape. You see them executing people who have just surrendered. That is a breach of the Geneva Convention, specifically set up to prevent these kind of crimes.
Piers, I think, a moment of honesty here, if we all may. It is actually quite tremendous, the level of scrutiny of the IDF and of Israel, of Prime Minister, which I'm not here to defend, but I am speaking on behalf of my country in a sense. I think that, the level of interest, scrutiny, and alleged focus and care about what happens, it is mind-boggling to see how much people allegedly care when it comes to dealing with issues that are related to Israel. And I think that there's merit to what you've been saying, and of course, seeing a video like this, it looks horrible, and that is what I said, and I believe in it. And I also believe that just like in the past, and the name of that soldier was Elor Azaria, you can check it up, what happened to him, how the IDF dealt with the issue, internal pressures, political pressures that, by the way, weren't very unsimilar to the current situation that the IDF is dealing with a complex political environment where everything is sensitive, where it is Israel fighting against terrorist organizations, and where we have politics that are involved in fighting. But at the end of a long process and public debate, that soldier was held accountable for his deeds. And I believe that if these policemen are indeed at fault, which the video looks like they were, but we shouldn't be hasty in delivering a sentence here. Then they will too face justice and they will face consequences.
You know my other problem, though, Jonathan. Jonathan, my other problem
is just an assertion.
When you fight, but
I know what you're going to say.
When you fight,
let me just say this. Here's the problem.
Yeah, but I mean, let me say it, Piers. You know, when you look at the amount of engagement, the amount of attacks, the amount of activity that Israel is forced to do every day and every night in order to defend itself, a very small percentage of activity doesn't go exactly as it is supposed to.
Yeah, but hang on. But I just got your word.
In order to defend itself, yeah, but everything they're doing at this point is offensive attacks. Everything since October 7th, 2 years ago now, it's all been 100% offensive maneuvers. None of this is defensive anymore. To even assert that that's like what's happening is completely ridiculous.
But Jonathan, Jonathan, hang on. We just have your word for that. Because the Israeli government continues to ban all international journalists, even though there's been a ceasefire for nearly 2 months.
That isn't true either, Piers, and you know it. There's been more than 60 journalists inside Gaza since the ceasefire.
There are people from friendly. There are people from Israeli government-friendly media taken in, embedded, and
international journalists.
Really? Well, why is
international journalists?
Well,
Piers.
Clarissa Ward.
60 crews have gone in,
Clarissa Ward,
including CNN and.
Okay. Well, Clarissa Ward, I'm glad you mentioned CNN because Clarissa Ward is one of the top people at CNN, one of their top international journalists. She said, this is your scheduled reminder, she posted today, that international journalists are still not allowed to report freely and independently inside Gaza. We're more than 7 weeks into the ceasefire. The previous excuse given by Israeli authorities for the banning of journalists was it was a security consideration, which was seen by many as a smokescreen, as articulated by the Committee to Protect Journalists. For 2 years, Israel sought to control the narrative on Gaza with a range of measures that are unprecedented compared to any war in modern memory, said CPJ CEO Jody Ginsburg. This includes targeted killings of Palestinian journalists, attacks on media facilities, the banning of news outlets, and the prohibition on independent media access. With a ceasefire now in place, Israel cannot be allowed to normalize this unlawful behavior. And yet here we are, she says, on Monday, December the 1st, an international journalist still cannot report freely and independently inside Gaza. And the problem is, Jonathan, and I know you agree with what I've said about this before. The problem is, it leaves us, we have to then take your word for it about how the IDF has operated, because we can't get independent word for it. It's only when these videos come out that it looks like actually they're not the most moral army in the world at all.
No, boy.
Piers, that Clarissa Ward that you're quoting and singing her praise is the same Clarissa Ward that I remember shooting a selfie video with big crocodile tears over a Palestinian so-called journalist.
She got duped.
Who, in fact, I forgot his name. Yeah. Well, no, she didn't get duped, and I don't think she did, and I don't think that she ever owned up to her mistake.
No, she made a mistake, and
did she own up to her mistake?
Yes,
did she own up to it and say, "Oh, I called this Palestinian terrorist a journalist, and I sang his praise," when in fact he was a known
They made no pretense that it was a mistake, and they got duped. But she remains one of the outstanding foreign correspondents of her entire era. So to question her word,
what I think she remains is someone who has clearly shown her bias, clearly shown her personal bias.
No, she got duped.
When it comes to the Israeli conflict. Well, did she do a fancy video saying I got duped and I said something?
This is insane because these two have been going back and forth for the last 10 minutes talking about absolutely nothing. And Dave Smith is here just scratching his head hey, when am I going to be able to actually just come in and say what's going on here?
That was wrong, and I misled my millions of followers on Instagram. I don't think she did. I think I would have seen that video if she would have, but she didn't, which shows you exactly a type of bias that Israel deals with.
All right, let me bring in Dave.
Bias and double standards like no.
And this is the problem with this Jonathan guy, and we've seen him before, is his ability to filibuster and grab the mic and just start his mouth running and then just keep going and going and going and going and grab the, the center of the conversation. And then look, you are 30 minutes into the interview and, he knows that there's a limited amount of time. He knows that his opponent on the other side is an absolute disaster for his narrative, for the pro-Israel, spin and propaganda, so that he can do whatever he can to grab the mic and just run with it until, basically just run the clock out so that we don't have to hear any other perspective. So, and he's good at what he does. You got to hand it to him.
For the country,
Okay.
present people included.
All right, Dave.
Okay, let me just respond to a bunch of stuff that you've said there. And you called for a moment of honesty here, which I think I'm honest every time I'm on this show. But in the spirit of this moment of honesty, let me just be honest with you, okay? This tactic that you just used, that we all just witnessed, where first you're saying we have let the media in. I don't know what you're talking about. 60 different crews have been let in. And then Piers shows you a CNN foreign correspondent saying, well, let me just finish my point here. Then he shows you a CNN foreign correspondent saying, hey, we're not allowed in. And then you immediately turn to a character attack on her. You immediately turn to, oh, she's a bad person. You see, she's sympathetic to Hamas or hates the Jews or something like that. People are onto that and they're over it. Let me give you some more honest information here. For you, I'm an American. Just like you said, you're defending your country, Israel. I'm an American. Your country is on my country's welfare. We have financed and given you the weapons and the diplomatic cover and the literal protection and vetoed the resolutions at the UN. We have protected and propped up Israel. And you have a lot of nerve to turn around and then say that we scrutinize what you do too much. I am forced against my will to pay for the destruction of Gaza, to pay for the military occupation of Palestine. And yeah, when I see videos of the military occupiers murdering a couple of surrendering people, yeah, I'm going to scrutinize that. I'm going to have an opinion on that. And it's just absolutely outrageous that you guys sit here when the whole world is watching. Sir, let me be honest with you. When the whole world sees you describe the IDF as fighting terrorism, we're all going, I don't know how dumb you think we are. The IDF, you were a spokesman for the biggest terrorist organization in the region, objectively the worst. And it's a region full of terrorist organizations.
Well, you're ridiculous.
And the IDF is the worst
the
one.
Moment, I mean, you had my ear and attention and a bit of my respect until you said that nonsense.
I don't care.
The last part of what
I don't
you
care
said.
about your
You're
respect.
entitled to, that's fine.
You're a spokesman for a terrorist organization, sir. I don't care about your respect.
You're entitled to your opinion sitting in your comfortable office in New York or wherever. You're entitled to have your feelings and opinions. The fact that you have them doesn't make it right. And the fact that you call the military of a nation state a terrorist organization, I think shows how ungrounded you are, and frankly, it's ridiculous. Yes, I made that specific remark about Clarissa.
You might as well have just been quiet for 30 seconds.
I said
you're comfortable in New York City.
Specifically,
you
what
say
I
a
said
state government
about,
is a terrorist organization.
I said what I said about Clarissa because I think it is very relevant when people who are when people who have the role and the power as the main conduits of information that shape hearts and minds and that really tell the story of what's going on, allegedly what's going on in Gaza, when they are shown and exposed to have a very clear anti-Israeli bias, yes, that is part of the story. That needs to be informed, and people should know about that because I think. No, it isn't only that. And again, had it only been getting a story wrong and owning up to the mistake and saying, well, I sure got this story wrong and maybe I should look at the other stories I got wrong, then I wouldn't have mentioned it. But I mention it because I think it is part of the issue. The level of scrutiny that Israel is under by so-called journalists who are basically opinion people that have big accounts on Instagram and corporate funding in terms of networks is unprecedented.
Well, Clarissa Ward is absolutely. I will defend. Jonathan, I will defend Clarissa Ward. She is not, as you're categorizing her. They got duped, and CNN conceded they got duped. Right? It was an elaborate sting to this guy to pretend to be somebody he wasn't, and they got duped. It happens in news, and CNN immediately held their hands up and said, when they investigated, we got duped. But when it comes to investigations, I'm glad you raised that because there have been myriad investigations launched by the IDF, launched by the Israeli government into allegations against the IDF. And you know the almost universal common denominator? We never get to hear what happens to them. We never get told the findings of all these investigations. I read out dozens of them a few months ago, unresolved. It's just we're investigating, and then they just hope everybody moves on.
Piers,
And that,
did you read, Piers, did you see on Friday, did you see the UN Committee on Torture on Friday just release a new report saying there's widespread torture of Palestinians. Hundreds of them have died from torture in the last couple years. There's widespread, like, what are we even talking
just say
about
there's
here?
is
Israel's under too much scrutiny?
Yeah, the
What are you
reason
talking- you're
Israel's
torturing
under,
people to death.
Well, the reason, Jonathan, that Israel is under so much scrutiny is precisely because it goes out of its way to avoid scrutiny.
Yeah.
Right? It literally bans.
I don't think that's the
it
reason.
Bans the
If
vast
you're honest,
majority
Piers,
of
I don't think
international
that's the
media
reason at all.
Well, let the journalists in.
Let
the journalists into Gaza.
The reason at all.
There's
no,
a
I don't think
ceasefire.
that is the reason.
There's a ceasefire.
I agree.
But
as I
Jonathan,
said,
the bullshit excuse that it's for the journalists' own safety, which was always bullshit, because they've all reported from all sorts of war zones,
and here
including
I agree with you.
Clarissa, who's a very, very courageous journalist.
And we've
Let them
spoken
in.
about it a lot.
Let them
Piers.
go in and do their jobs.
I agree.
But then we agree.
I agree. And
But that's why you get
a long
scrutinized.
time ago. No, that
Okay,
isn't
well,
why we get
but how about
scrutinized,
this,
Piers. That
Piers?
isn't
Could
why
you not just
international
imagine-
network, Piers, that
Oh, boy.
isn't why international networks have their biggest out of London or out of US offices in Jerusalem, out of all places in the world. That isn't why the amount of international journalists per people here is the highest ratio in the world. That isn't why news editions around the world and internet and TV and shows like yours have such a tremendous focus on Israel. It isn't because Israel tries to evade scrutiny. It has to be different things. It goes back deeper. It is rooted in history. It is rooted in the land that we're in. It's probably related to that old hatred against my people and many other things.
yes.
But at the end of the day,
Well, that's
we
it.
cannot
Okay, so
deny-
It's all just
Yes,
anti-Semitism.
all right, hang on.
Very good.
Can I just respond to that, Piers, please?
Dave, I will let you come in, but I'm going to give it
It's impressive, though. It took him, 35 minutes in to drop the anti-Semitic line. Usually it happens much sooner with these debates.
a peg to come in, because actually you've perfectly timed that, Jonathan, where you try and conflate scrutiny of the Israeli government and criticism of the Israeli government with
not
people
scrutiny of the
hating
government.
Israelis or hating Jews, because the Anti-Semite of the Year nominees have just been revealed.
Oh, boy.
Piers. What's quite interesting about this list is organized by the Stop Anti-Semitism Watchdog is just
Wow. I'm surprised. I am so surprised that Dave Smith is not on this list. So you have Tucker Carlson, Miss Rachel's number 2. Yo. So Tucker Carlson, number 1. I guess maybe these are just finalists. I don't think this is any kind of ranking, but Miss Rachel, Guy Christensen, I don't know who that is. Maria Cross, don't know who that is. Bryce Mitchell, UFC fighter, might actually be anti-Semitic. We might have to look into that one. Cynthia Nixon, she ran for mayor in New York City. I believe she's a progressive. Cenk Uygur, we know Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks. Stu Peters, I don't know. And Kaya Walsh, I have no idea. There you have Anti-Semite of the Year. I believe if I had a vote, if it were my vote, it would have to go to Miss Rachel. I think she would run away with it. Absolutely nobody more despicable and disgusting than Miss Rachel on this list. Absolutely.
Just the ones that I know who've come on this show: Tucker Carlson, Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian. Just those 3 alone. I've never heard them express their hatred for Jewish people. Why would they be branded anti-Semitic, even if they've been aggressively critical of the Israeli government? Now, Dave, I'll let you respond to that, because it really flies to the ongoing running sore I have about this, because I get branded anti-Semitic purely because I criticize Netanyahu's decision making, which I think is completely outrageous. But it's done to silence
it's all they
legitimate
have, Piers.
debate.
It's so pathetic, man. It's like you. I think the list there. I think those are the 3 people I know on it too. Are Cenk, Anna, and Tucker. And it's just no, they're not anti-Semites at all. They've never once said anything about the Jews.
No.
They've all bent over backwards to say that's not what I'm about. Miss Rachel, as far as I understand, just makes little kids programming and feels bad for the Palestinians. It's insane that they go after her. But to Jonathan's point, even when he tied this together, look, Piers, just look at these facts objectively, okay? I'm trying to remove my opinion from it as much as possible. Over the last 2 years, Israel has essentially destroyed all of Gaza. They've expanded settlements on the West Bank in their occupied territory under their military occupation there, and a bunch of people have been killed over there. Despite what Dave Rubin doesn't know about anything, Pierce, you were absolutely correct. There have been settlement expansions. Israel has also bombed Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. I think I'm missing one. I think there was a seventh over the last 2 years. Might that be why there is some scrutiny on them, Pierce?
Qatar, they bombed in Qatar too.
Maybe it's not just everyone's hated by anti-Semitism. Yeah, okay, fine.
Might there be a reason why Israel bombed it, Dave?
Sure. And right,
did anybody attack Israel?
One second, Jonathan. I was trying to remove my own opinion and just state the objective facts. We could have that whole argument. The point is, there is another reason than just you're talking here with Piers Morgan, who isn't a Jew hater, and me, who is Jewish, and you're invoking anti-Semitism whenever Israel gets criticism. Maybe it's just that you guys are a rogue regime that's killing tens of thousands of people and violating international law, and also attempting to drag my country into more and more conflicts, exerting an undue amount of influence on my government. Maybe that's what's going on, and maybe you should admit this. You know, it's like you're like the person who's like a serial gambler and then says the reason I'm losing everything is because everyone's against me. Look at your own behavior, man.
All right, we're going to leave it at that. Conricus comes back, but he just rambles and mumbles and filibusters at the end there. Doesn't really add anything to the conversation, so I'll just leave that off. If you want to check out the full clip, I cut out a little bit in the beginning just to save some time there. But yeah, curious to know what you guys think about that discussion. It took Dave a little bit while to get going there. Eventually, he was able to get his points in and make it very clearly. Just absolutely humiliating stuff for that Jonathan character. Piers Morgan keeps having him on and claiming like he's this reasonable Israeli actor. He's just as insane as the rest of them. I mean, I don't know where Piers gets off thinking. I guess he needs to have a voice on the other side at some point. You got to represent both voices. I understand that, but when one side is just so utterly and completely unhinged and belligerent, it eventually, you start asking like, are these voices even worth having? I mean, we have to come to some kind of reasonable, middle here. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments as well. Dave Smith, Jonathan Conricus, propaganda. And I'll see you guys in the next one.